Hi, my name's Amanda Baker from Flutterby Creations. Today we're going to have a look at getting the most out of your Stampin' Up ink pads. Stampin' Up have two different types of inks available, dye and pigment based inks. In the video today we're going to have a look at getting the most out of your ink pads, the different types of inks that are available, and some tricks and tips that you can use with your ink pads. The first of Stampin' Up's dye-based ink is our classic ink pads. These are available in over 40 different colours and are used for most of your general rubber stamping, card making and scrapbooking needs. Our second dye-based ink is StazOn, which is a permanent dye-based ink. This can be used on items such as fabric, and it's also useful for watercolouring as the dye-based ink won't run, as it is a permanent solvent-based ink. Our two pigment-based inks are mainly used for embossing. We have a white craft pigment ink and we also have a clear Versamark ink. So today we're going to have a look at some of these ink pads in more detail, as well as how to use them, how to open a Stampin' Up ink pad, and some tricks for using the different kinds of ink pads. I hope you enjoy the video. If you'd like more information about any of these techniques, please have a look at my website, which is www.flutterbycreations.com.au. The main question I get asked is how to open a Stampin' Up ink pad. This is one of our traditional classic ink pads. You'll notice down the bottom of the ink pad there are some slight indentations. Hold the ink pad with the logo facing up, put your thumb on top of these indentations and press. It will slide away the top of the lid from the ink pad. Flip the ink pad over so that the bottom is facing upwards, and then using two hands, slide back the top layer 180 degrees, push the ink pad in until it clicks in place, and then your ink pad is now open. I'm often asked the best way to get ink onto your stamp. There are a couple of different methods that you can choose, and the one that you end up using will be the one that you prefer the most. I tend to use the fairly basic method where you keep your stamp pad flat on the table, take your stamp and press it onto the surface of the stamp pad. You can press quite firmly on the surfaces of the classic stamp pads and they won't get too much ink on your paper. So once you've got enough ink on your stamp, you can turn it upside down to check, and then you can stamp on your paper. The other method that some people do use is to rub their stamp onto the ink pad. That is also quite effective as well. Sometimes when you have large stamps such as background stamps, it's a little hard to press the stamp onto the ink pad as you can't really see what you're doing. So the easiest way to do that is to keep your large stamp flat on the table, turn your ink pad upside down and press it onto the stamp. With a large solid background stamp such as this medallion one, it is sometimes easier to rub the stamp pad over the surface of the stamp to get better ink coverage. Once you have full coverage with your ink pad, then you can stamp your image. These are some of the Stampin' Up products that you can use with your Stampin' Up ink pads. The first one that we have here today is the Stampin' Up ink refill. When your ink pads start to run dry, you can use these to re-ink your ink pads rather than having to buy a new ink pad. Next we have a watercolour pen. This can be used in conjunction with the ink pads to put colour onto your projects. You can also use a sponge directly onto the surface of your ink pad, as well as a sponge dauber. These can both be used to add shading to various projects. One thing that you can do with your Stampin' Up ink pads is you can use an open ink pad to rub colour onto a crumpled up piece of paper. This is just a crumpled up piece of Whisper White cardstock and a rich raspberry ink pad. So take your ink pad in one hand and your crumpled up piece of paper in the other hand, and just rub the surface of the ink pad on the top of your paper. This will pick up the colour on the folded pieces, crumpled bits of the paper, and then you have colour on your paper. Stampin' Up ink pads are fantastic to use with watercolour pens and blender pens. They can be used to pick up the colour from the ink pad. The main way that you do this is to take your ink pad, press it between both palms, open up the ink pad, and then you'll have a pool of colour inside the lid of your stamp pad. This then becomes your colour palette. You can then pick up your watercolour pen or your blender pen, pick up some colour from the ink pad and then colour in your image. If you would like more information about Stampin' Up! Ink pads and the different techniques that you can use them for, please check my website at www.flutterbycreations.com.au. Thanks for watching the video, and don't forget to check back to my website in the future for more educational videos.